seara! Sunt Ioana Bâldea Constantinescu, brand manager al editurii Corint și în această seară vă invit să urmăriți un interviu cu autorul David R. Gillham. Este cel care semnează volumul Annelies, apărut în colecția Corint Fiction, o carte în care autorul își propune o țintă ambițioasă și în același timp foarte delicat, foarte subtil tratată, cu foarte multă responsabilitate istorică, și anume răspunsul la o întrebare complexă. Ce s-ar fi întâmplat dacă Anne Frank ar fi supraviețuit? Now, you wrote about how you embarked on this journey of writing Annelies precisely because you wanted to offer her a life, even though it is an entirely fictional one. What kept you going?
Well, I think, the word obsession comes to mind. I had actually started trying to write a novel about Anne Frank when I was 28, which was quite a number of years ago now. I had read the diary in my 20s, not in my teens as many people do, but in my 20s, and it had just struck me like a thunderbolt. Her ability, her talent, her emotion, it was all just so fabulously well done. And to think she was only 15, 16 years old at the time, even younger, 13 was when she got the diary. Yes. And to watch how her style progressed from the time when she was 13 and just talking about her school friends to the time she went into hiding and a year or so after, how deep her work was. And I really became, entranced with the idea of writing something about her. But at 28, I just couldn't do it. I don't know. I didn't have the horses, as my old professor used to say at that point, and so I put it away. And then many years later, in the late 90s, I gave it a try again. And at that point, it had hit me that I could try to write about her as if she had lived, what her life would be. And again, I started it and it didn't go anywhere. It was just, I found myself sort of circling the character of Anne. I was writing about other people, but I was still too hesitant to focus on my main character. So I put it aside again, and it wasn't until several years later that I tried it for the third time, and that's when it started to work, to really, open up on the page. I wrote that first scene where she basically comes back to life, and after that, I realized I was going to do it this time. Although it took a long time, 6.5 years for me to finish this book.
Now, there is a lot of intertextuality between your book and the journal. You obviously proved to be an avid reader of the journal. Now, is it hard to write about somebody who so famously wrote herself?
Yes, yes, it is. It's very hard to write about anybody who actually existed. Writing about a historical character has all sorts of sort of pitfalls and restrictions that just simply making up a character just does not. But then also having to reproduce a writer and have them be creative, but without trying to put words onto the page for her. I didn't want to actually write for her in this book. I wanted to write about her in this book in that respect. But it was very difficult, and yeah, I used actual quotes from her diary a great deal at the beginning of every chapter.
It's like a dance up to a certain point. Now, I felt that memory is a character in itself, and maybe it is one of the most intense ones in the novel. Now, how would you describe this process of building these worlds of shadow and pain and survivor's guilt and rage around a teenage girl?
Yes, it wasn't easy. I explored areas of what I thought it must be like for not just Anne Frank, but for anyone who had gone through such horror to come back to life, and how difficult that would be, especially for someone so young, because in the book she's 17 years old, and to try to re-inhabit herself and re-inhabit the world, and at the same time that the way I wrote it is I felt that she was both trying to forget and never forget
Exactly.
what had happened. Her father, Otto, I characterized in the book as wanting to, really working hard to put it all behind him. The past is the past, and he just wanted to move forward, and he was, and that somehow angered Anne in the book, that because it was impossible for her to do that. She felt so guilty about her mother and about Margot, and why it was her and not Margot who survived, and of course, all this is just me fictionalizing this, but it was very difficult, and you're absolutely right. Memory played a very strong part in the book, whether or not the characters were trying to suppress the memories, or whether or not they were trying to force to build a life with those memories, and to not deny them, and not and still find some way, some path toward a life, toward happiness and fulfillment.
That was beautifully put. Now, I'm very glad you mentioned this antagonism, in a way, between Anne Frank and Pim in your book, and her father, Otto Frank, because it is the backbone of the narrative.
Yes, it
up
is.
to a certain point. And one of them cannot escape the past, as you put it, and the other one is determined to look towards the future. Was this character of Pim, of Otto Frank, in a way more problematic than that of Anne, because Anne is so documented in the end?
Well, Otto himself was quite documented as well, because he died in 1980, and so that was 35 years practically that he had, certainly over 30 years in the spotlight, trying to solidify not just Anne's memory, but the memory of what happened. So in real life, he was both those things. He was somebody who didn't want to forget and wanted to remind everybody, but he didn't want to dwell on the the doomed aspect of his children. He wanted to dwell on their life, and Anne's life in particular, and the message of international hope. So I tried to take that and sort of localize it into the character of Pim after the war, trying to reassemble his life, and move on. And of course, it's also a generational thing. It's also Anne's, at 17, the character of Anne's lack of maturity, that she doesn't understand that Pim is not forgetting about everything, that he feels responsible not just to himself, but to the memory of his family, and to the people who helped him to, in fact, build another life, because he survived. And Anne thinks that he's trying to pretend it didn't happen. I mean, it feels to Anne like he's trying to pretend it didn't happen, and so that angers her, and she always has to push it back in his face. And then, of course, when he meets the woman who he ends up marrying, a completely fictional character, I might add. It was nothing like the lady he actually that Otto Frank actually married 10 years later. The character of Hadassah was completely whole cloth out of my imagination, and I brought her in because I felt she was sort of a halfway between Otto and Anna, halfway between Pim and Anne, in that she was very blunt about her intentions to build a life, and unsentimental about memory. Whereas the rawness of it with Anne was sometimes crippling for Anne, and the love that he had felt for his former life was sometimes crippling for Pym, in that he was given to sentimentalizing it at times. And so I felt that Hadassah was in fact a bridge between them, even though Anne looked at her as a dividing, a line of demarcation.
Yes, I felt that this is a very delicate epic construction, precisely because on the one hand you have the trauma which you have to deal with, definitely, and then you have this very normal, let's say, in a way, conflict between a growing daughter and a father. You have this generational gap, this clash, this continuous mixing of feelings that are very intense on either side, and you balance them beautifully. So thank you so much for that. Why do you think that we keep being so acutely interested in the Anne Frank story?
Well, I think that part of it, a large part of it, is the simple tragedy of it. That when you read her diary, um, it is so beautifully done and so effective, and so well, just that. I mean, it's just so inspiring, and again, the idea that she was so young and still could be so insightful, and then here it is, it's all cut off. August 3rd, that's the last day. She writes 2 days before that, on August 1st, and they're arrested on the 3rd of August, and that's it. um, by February, she and Margot are both dead.
Is it in
um,
a way also a trauma for the reader, the fact that it ends also abruptly, and it's like a turning point? You actually feel the physical need of the story going on.
Yes, and I think it also, I think it illustrates the Holocaust in a way um, that is really substantially um, affecting. Um, you can get lost in the numbers, 6 million, 12 million, but you read Anne Frank's diary and it just hits you, you know,
Yeah.
directly, that of the loss of not just her, but of all the Annes. Who knows who we lost um, in during that time, and I think it's really it brings it to a human level, and a level of understanding that is really astonishing. Her work does.
This is a very difficult subject you embarked on.
Yes,
Did you ever have moments of doubt, of self-doubt while writing?
I had doubts of whether or not I could pull it off. um, it was, like I said, it took me. I thought I would be able to do it in 2 years. It took 6.5. Various versions just didn't go anywhere, or went off in the wrong direction, and it was. I found it exhausting. By the end of 6 years, I was worn to a frazzle trying to write this book. Um, I had also traveled. I had gone to Amsterdam twice. Um, I'd gone to Bergen-Belsen. I'd gone to Auschwitz-Birkenau. I'd seen Westerbork. I had gone to her, not just the Anne Frank house where they were in hiding, but I had also seen their apartment that they lived in before they went into hiding. It had been um, not remodeled. What's the word I'm searching for? Um, it had been redone to resemble, what it looked like when they lived there. Um, and so there was a huge amount of research and energy just in that direction. And then, of course, the writing was very emotionally charged, and um, and yeah, it was draining.
And yet you did. I mean, you came with this beautiful book, which we can now show to the audience. And it's 6 years in it, and a lot of effort intellectually, emotionally, artistically, and so on, and totally worth it. So we, the public, must thank you for that, for really giving this journey and taking it to the end. You make it very clear that it was not your intention to offer precise answers as to what happened there, who betrayed whom, and so on. Yet, was it challenging to avoid blaming, naming, embracing one theory or the other?
Yeah, I did try to sort of pay heed to all the various theories, but even when one character decides, I know what happened, it's just the character talking. It's not me. You know, as the author, I never come down on um, any particular theory of
Yes.
what happened on the side of anyone, because we don't know, and we may never know.
Why was that important to you? Because deep down, after all that research, you must have your own idea as to what happened.
Yeah, it was important to me because I knew it was going to be important to the readers, and so I didn't want to ignore the controversies or the theories about who betrayed them. There's even a theory put forth that they weren't betrayed, that it was just that the Gestapo had arrived because they thought that there was some black market activity going on at the warehouse, and they just happened to stumble onto the hiding place. Um, but I thought, you know, everyone is invested who knows the story in one um, theory or another, and I knew they'd be, as the readers would be looking for some explanation.
Yeah.
And so again, like I said, I tried to have the characters offer theories, but so that would be satisfying for the reader, that you know they understood that, oh well, yeah, this could happen, or this could happen, or this could happen. But again, I didn't come down on any particular theory. um, I actually don't have a favorite theory. um, you know, it's like uh, trying to put together this historical puzzle. um, Everything sounds good. Everything sounds very possible, and then you think, well, or maybe not, maybe this is what happened. And so it is difficult, at least for me, to have come down and onto one theory or another.
I personally totally loved it that you built it this way, because I felt like the stress was on the fictional quality of the prose, and I love that about the book. Now, you said Anna's legacy is a legacy of hope, and in your book, things really, really do progress towards a luminous point in the end. Yet the original story is one about a child who was hunted down and eventually murdered. She eventually died this gruesome death. Where did you find the strength to deal with that traumatic core of the story?
Where did I find the strength? I think that my drive to honor her memory, and you know, humbly, very humbly, the idea that I could possibly, at least for a moment, give her the life she didn't have. You know, give her the life she was denied, even in this small way of writing this book. Um, that's what kept me afloat. That was my hope, and my reason for doing it. Um, and So when it got, you know, it was very difficult when I was at Belsen, where she and Margot are buried. um, Nobody knows in which one of the mass graves, but it was, you know, to think this is where it ended for them was really hard. um, but I was just committed to it. you know, I was, you know, as I think I said, I used the word obsession earlier. That's what it had become. That I was just obsessed with the idea of finishing this before I could go on to anything else.
Now, your book is dedicated to all the Anne out there.
Yeah.
Which chapter of Annelies do you think Anne Frank herself would have liked best?
Oh. um, that's so hard to know. I think I'm going to have to think about that for a second. I think that the early chapters, because I realized as I was writing it that I couldn't just start the entire, you know, even though the book begins with her coming back to life, I then go backwards, and I go backwards in time to when she first gets the diary on her 13th birthday, a few months before they go into hiding. And I think that I tried really hard to capture the brightness of, you know, this teenager who was very chatty. That the chatterbox, as she called herself, um, and who was constantly looking for some sort of way to enjoy life more. I think that were somehow she to read the book, I think that would be that I would hope that she would find that those chapters to be satisfying.
Well, this is a wonderful answer, and it has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so very much for it. I totally loved it.
Oh, well, thank you so much. It was great talking to you. I really enjoyed it.